Good evening, class. This is going to be just a short lecture on the rise of Islam. Now, you might be asking, why are we talking about Islam in a Western Civ class? But, well, like many things in history, Western civilization has been affected by things outside of Western civilization. So to understand the reaction of people in Western Europe at this time, we have to at least have a basic understanding of what they're reacting against. And to understand the High Middle Ages, and more importantly the Crusades which occurred during the High Middle Ages, we have to understand what those Crusades were about and who they were against. Of course, they were against Muslim forces. So I hope you guys are doing well tonight. One reason why I'm getting this online late is because, well, to put it bluntly, I was busy today. It's been raining cats and dogs, and I left the windows down on my car and had a lot of stuff from school in there, so I've been drying stuff out all day. But that being said, let's get started with tonight's lecture. If you guys want some sort of visual proof of this, if you turn to page 208, you'll see an illustration at the top of the page showing the Middle East. And you'll notice in this small little map, you'll see in sort of a blue-green color the Byzantine Empire. And at the time, the Byzantine Empire controlled not only modern-day Turkey and the Balkans, but also the strip of territory along the Mediterranean that is now Israel and Syria, and also the northern part of modern-day Egypt. To the east of the Byzantine Empire, on page 208, you will see an orange-shaded area. This is what is often known as the Sassanid Empire, or the Empire of New Persia. This is the sort of the world around 400 AD, the world of the Middle East. If you'll notice there in Arabia, nobody's claiming that, and that's because outside of the Byzantine Empire and also the Sassanid Empire, there was no strong authority, no strong central authority, that is. In Arabia, for example, it was anarchic society, made up mainly of nomadic tribesmen known as Bedouins, moving from place to place and trading in this area. This doesn't mean that the society was chaos. It just was anarchy. There was no central authority. In Arabia at this time, this was still an area where they practiced extensions of those Mesopotamian religions that we talked about at the very beginning of class. So these are pagan religions. And outside of Mecca and Medina, which are located, as you can see on this map, close to the Red Sea, there are very few urban areas. Most of the people who live in this area are, again, nomadic Bedouins who don't have a set location where they live. They don't have a street address, but instead move all over the sands of the Arabian Peninsula. And it's into this society that a young boy is born by the name of Muhammad. Now, Muhammad has an interesting background in that as a child around the age of 6 or 7, both of his parents die. Now, I have up on the screen here that he was a street orphan in Mecca. And this is a relative term, because one of the things that you have to remember, whether these people lived in Mecca and Medina or out in the waste of the Arabian desert, many of these people were part of larger clans. And Muhammad was part of a clan called the Banu Hashim. So when his parents die, Muhammad was adopted by his grandfather, and then when his grandfather died, came under the tutelage of his uncle. Now, his uncle was a prominent Bedouin merchant. He traveled all over the area. According to historical record, Muhammad and his uncle traveled as far north as the Byzantine Empire, traveled throughout what is today called the Holy Land, traveled into Egypt. So Muhammad had experience and had contact not only with the civilization and society that he was part of, but also the societies of Orthodox Christianity as well as Hebrew Judaism. There are even some accounts that Muhammad, during his travels, traveled with Christian monks on their way to the Holy Land, making pilgrimage into the Holy Land. And for this reason, this is probably the most likely reason that Islam is considered part of the Judeo-Christian religion, because Muhammad actually will say that he has visions, or said he had visions from the angel Gabriel, the very same angel that came to Joseph and Mary to sort of give them the news that their son would be the Christ. But before having his visions, Muhammad would become a well-respected merchant to the point that people would come to him for advice and to act as a objective third party. He was considered incredibly honest and was asked to mediate many disputes. And by the age of, somewhere between the ages of 16 and 20, Muhammad was a successful and well-respected merchant in Mecca. He was so well-respected that a 40-year-old widow that was 15 to 20 years older than he was would actually propose to him, and of course Muhammad would take her up on her offer. His new wife, Khadra, spelled Khadijah, was not only a wealthy widow, but her former husband, her dead husband, was also a wealthy merchant. So Muhammad profited by this marriage, not only by having a wife that had money, but also a wife that had connections. And of course, this allowed him to have not only the means to expand his business, but these contacts would facilitate his proselytizing of a new religion. Now, as I said, sometime after his marriage, Muhammad supposedly has visions in which the angel Gabriel came to him and told Muhammad that he was to be the founder of a new religion, told him the principles of this new religion, and told him to be a prophet, to proselytize and convert people to this religion. However, this new religion, as we will talk about, is quite different from the society that Muhammad was born into. It challenged the existing power structure of Mecca, because the existing power structure of Mecca was built on those traditional pagan beliefs that Islam challenges. And so as a result, Muhammad and his early converts are forced to flee Mecca into the waste of the Arabian Peninsula, and they relocate in the other urban area of Arabia, which is Medina. This is known as the Hajj, or the Hajj. I should say the Hajj or the Hajra. And while traveling to Mecca, or to Medina, I should say, not Mecca, to Medina, Muhammad converts many of the Bedouin tribesmen. So in a lot of ways, Muhammad's first converts are these Bedouin tribesmen, these men and women, I should say, who are not only hardy and hardened individuals living out there in the waste of Arabia, but they're also not a warlike people, but these people know how to throw down. They know how to protect themselves, and Muhammad will build a religious army, a Muslim army, out of his converts in Arabia and as well as Medina. and he will return to Mecca in 630 and forcibly convert Mecca. So by 630, Muhammad has pretty much dominated the most populated areas of the Arabian Peninsula. Now, to understand Islam's effects on the West, we have to understand what Islam actually is. As I told you, Islam is a part of the Judeo-Christian tradition. This is sort of the weird irony of Islam. While Muslims have a modern hatred of the West, this was not always the case. Islam initially considers Jews and Christians to be what they called people of the book, which means that they are precursors to Islam. Muhammad often spoke of Moses and even Jesus as being prophets that prepared the way for the final prophet, which of course was himself. So while they don't consider Jews or Christians to be equal to Muslims, and they will place special taxes on Jews and Christians, they do not try and exterminate them, which early on this new Muslim army that is founded by Muhammad will forcibly convert the pagans of this area. So if you do not convert to Islam and you're one of these non-Christian, non-Jewish believers, they will put you to the sword. Now, the core of Islamic belief are the 5 pillars of faith. And these should sound somewhat familiar because the very first one is there is only Allah and the Quran is the only truth. Like the 10 Commandments, the very first thing that Muslims are taught to believe is there is only one God and there is only one truth. On top of this, Muslims are taught that they must pray regularly. And when I say pray regularly, I'm serious, because if you've ever watched documentaries or if you've know somebody from an Islamic country, these people will stop what they're doing wherever they're at and pray if the time for prayer rolls around. In Islamic countries, the call to prayer is broadcast from the Islamic mosque over loudspeakers so that people will know it's time to pray. And this happens 3 or 4 times a day, and people literally will stop whatever they're doing, take off their shoes, throw out a prayer rug, get down on their knees and put their head to the ground and face toward Mecca, generally wherever they think Mecca is at, and pray. During the Iran-Iraq war, there were times when the fighting would stop so that the two sides could pray. Also, a pillar of faith is one must be generous, one must give. And finally, the last two are one must fast. And this happens normally during the Islamic holy day of Ramadan, where you fast for, I think it's actually more than one day. And then the final and one of the most important pillars of faith is that if you are a Muslim, you must make at least one pilgrimage in your lifetime to Mecca, preferably at least make a pilgrimage within at least every 1 or 2 years. But if you can't afford that, make at least one pilgrimage to Mecca. And this, of course, happens, and you see the stone monument that is there in the center of Mecca. And all of these Muslims milling around it. These are pilgrims who have come to Mecca to make this pilgrimage that is mandated by the religion. Now, this is probably a controversial subject, but you see on the slide here that I say that Muslim society is less patriarchal than traditional Middle Eastern society. And what I mean by that is the society that Islam replaces treats women as property. They are considered no more of a person than many people would consider a dog. Islam, while being patriarchal and favoring men, is less patriarchal than the religions it replaces. I mean, today we hear about women not being allowed to drive, not being able to be allowed to go to school, not being allowed to hold public office or work in traditionally male jobs like doctors or lawyers or things like that. These are all true. And these are true to varying different degrees depending on the Middle Eastern country that you are part of, or I should more accurately, the Islamic country you are part of, because there are Islamic countries in Asia as well. But Muslims don't see it this way. They don't see it as they are persecuting or infringing upon women's rights. They view it as they are protecting the virtue of women. I remember watching Anthony Bourdain. If you've ever watched Anthony Bourdain, he's the tall New Yorker who was a cook who travels around the world, talking about their cultures and especially their food. He had a show called No Reservations on Food Network, and is now on CNN with a show, I think it's called No Boundaries. But he was in Saudi Arabia, and he was being led around by a young lady who was born here in the United States but married to a Saudi, and now is living in Saudi Arabia. And she was explaining the restaurant that they were in. Now, imagine this. You're in a restaurant, and there are booths like you have, but every booth has a double glass pane door, and it's clouded like a shower door. And so that when you enter this, you close this behind you, and of course nobody can see you eat. Single men are not allowed into that part of the restaurant. There's a completely separate room for single men. And this woman was telling Anthony Bourdain that the reason why they separate single men from families, and the reason why you have these doors, is so that families who bring in the wives and also the daughters who come in can sit down and actually take off the burqa, the traditional headdress, and eat and not be seen. And of course, single men are kept there. Now you might be asking, why don't they have a part of the restaurant for single women? Why do women have to wear the burqa in the first place? Well, the burqa is justified in this way. They don't see it as a way of putting figurative chains on the woman. They view it as a way of protecting her, because the burqa is designed to keep men from lusting after them and holding men sort of at bay by hiding what the woman looks like. Again, I remember when I was going over to UT, there was a woman who was attending UT, and she was from, I guess, a very traditional Islamic country, because she wore the full burqa, which, if you go to some more moderate Islamic countries, they wear the headdress and, the burqas that come down to their wrist and ankles. And sometimes in the more, what you might call liberal Islamic countries, they just have to wear a headdress, but you can see their face as well. But in traditional, more hardcore Islamic countries, women have to cover everything but their eyes. Sometimes, in Afghanistan, they even wear kind of a lace over their eyes. But this woman wore a traditional burqa in which literally it was like a ski mask. You couldn't see the woman's face. It was a flowing gown that came down almost beyond her wrist. And most of the time she wore like silky gloves. I can tell you one thing, that the young lady had very beautiful eyes, but that's all I could tell you about her, because you couldn't see anything. It was just like somebody wearing a bed sheet over them. And the purpose was just that. I could not tell anything about the woman. And under this logic, this Islamic logic, It protects the woman by basically making her appear, well, something that, I'm not interested in because it looks like somebody just under a bedsheet. The reason why women are not supposed to be in male society, drive cars, hold jobs, is that would place them outside the protection of the male members of the family. Remember, Islam is growing out of a society where women were considered property to be protected, property that could be stolen or vandalized. And so, in order to protect the virtue of the woman in Islamic society from these traditional values, well, in traditional Islamic society, a woman is forbidden from leaving the house without a male escort, either an older brother or a male family member like a father or an uncle. This is so that she doesn't get accosted or raped by a man. Now, this leads to some of the what I would consider injustices according to our Western ideals, because since women are forbidden from doing this, if they do leave or find themselves outside of the protection of a male member, if they find themselves alone and they are raped, well, they're blamed because they shouldn't have been without a male escort, which in our Western sense is incredibly unfair, but that's the logic. And that's why women are basically, in the Western sense, second-class citizens and not allowed to fully take part in their society. Now, Islam is not only a religion, but it is a political and economic system as well. The Quran, the Islamic Bible, if you will, speaks about the social issues. It's a political system, and it also lays out economic values as well. So this is a uniform social view. This is a political ideology, a social viewpoint, as well as a religion. And as such, it helps unify the nomadic tribes of Arabia into a unified force. The first time that this has happened. It also crosses socioeconomic lines, because one of the 5 pillars says that wealthy Muslims must be generous. They must take care of those that are not as well off as they are. That is why in traditional Islamic societies they have what amounts to welfare, where the wealthy have to pay certain taxes in order to support the less well-to-do, to take care of widows, to take care of orphans, to take care of the sick and the injured. This probably comes out of Muhammad's own experience, being an orphan at age 6 or 7. And so you have this social outlook in religion that has similar rites and rituals. It gave people a common viewpoint to rally around, and as such, along with its economics or economic background, this will lead to an economic revival in the region. And because of Islam, it will help the area prosper. Now, the interesting thing about this is many Jews and Christians who lived in this area will actually side with the Muslims against empires like Byzantium, because they tolerated Islam because Islam tolerated them. Byzantium taxed them, and it was a question of, do I want to be taxed by an empire far away in Constantinople, or do I want to pay the special tax that Jews and Christians have to pay to an Islamic government, but it's an Islamic government that I have access to, I can go and speak to, and maybe I can even work with. Because before the Crusades, Jews and Christians were considered welcome so long as they followed special rules. They had to pay a special tax that Muslims did not have to pay, and it was forbidden on the penalty of death for Jews or Christians to convert any Muslim. If you converted a Muslim to Christianity or Judaism, you could be put to death. This is, of course, because Muslims feel that Islam is the premier philosophy, the premier religion. And as such, Jews and Christians, well, they have to pay this tax, which also kind of gives an impetus, gives an incentive for Jews and Christians to convert. Now, this is better than what Muslims did to the pagans. The pagans either converted or they died. Now, very early on, you start to see cracks in the Muslim world, cracks that we still see today. Because when Muhammad dies in 632, there's a question of who is going to be his replacement. Who is going to pick up the staff of leadership of this new religion? Because by Muhammad's death, Islam had grown to a pretty sizable religion. If you turn to page 239, let's see here, so I can give you some pointers. Actually, not 239. Let me go back here. Let me find it really quick. Actually, it's 210. If you look at 210, at the time of Muhammad's death, a good portion of the Arabian Peninsula was fully Islamic, and Islam was moving into areas that had been controlled by the Byzantine Empire. They were starting to convert the Sassanid Empire, and they were moving into Egypt. So the Muslim world was expanding, but there was a question of who was going to control it. Now, your book, this is where I differ from the book from what I know of history. The book, for example, lays out that Muhammad's followers picked a wealthy merchant by the name of Abu Bakr as his replacement or caliph. However, what I was taught when I was in school was that the nephew of Muhammad by the name of Ali was chosen as his replacement, as his successor. And this question of succession would lead to a divide in the Muslim world, because the followers of Ali believed that all Muslims should respect his authority, and of course any successor that Ali chooses should have that same respect as well. However, a large portion of the Muslim world rejected this idea of a singular leader of the Muslim world. They instead favored having the leadership be more spread out. And this divide is illustrated in the modern Shiite-Sunni split, because the followers of Ali are the founders of the Shiite religion, or the Shiite branch of Islam. And those that opposed Ali are those that founded the Sunni branch of Islam. And if you go to the Middle East today, the vast majority of Muslims, whether it be Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, Tunisia, and Libya, and half or about a third of Iraq are all Sunni. The heart of Shia is Iran. There are some Shiites in Iraq. but the vast majority of the Shiites live in Iran. And this not only affects the Muslim world, which we won't have time to talk about, but it affects the Western world even today. Because one of the interesting aspects of what's going on right now, possible war with Syria, the continued tension between the United States and Iran, for example, I want you guys, when you're reading the news or surfing the internet, you need to delve beyond just the surface politics and look at some of the underlying motivations. One of the largest groups lobbying for America to take Iran out is none other than Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia considers itself to be the center of the Sunni Muslim world. It's the home of Mecca. Mecca is located in Saudi Arabia, and the House of Saud, which is the ruling family of Saudi Arabia, tries to lead or be a leading force in the Sunni world. Of course, this means that they are in direct opposition to the Iranians and the heads of the Shiite religion that is centered in Iran. The Saudis would love nothing more than Iran to be wiped off the face of the earth, because not only would it basically weaken the Shiite branch of Islam, but it would strengthen Saudi Arabia politically, economically, as well as religiously. And so they've been behind the scenes lobbying the United States to take out Iran. A lot of the problems in Iraq are caused by this Sunni-Shiite split. About a third of the population in Iraq is Shiite. About a little bit over a third is Sunni, and a little under a third is another branch of Islam, which we're not going to really talk about, is the Kurdish religion. Now, these cracks will remain just that. They will be cracks that expand, but not immediately. Because Islam will expand greatly. Just as if you look on page 210, you will notice that Islam moves relatively quickly. Let me give you some dates here. By the end of the 600s, Islam expands into the new Persian or Sassanid Empire right in here. It takes lands from the Byzantine Empire right here, and as well as into Egypt. By the 700s, it not only moves all the way to the Atlantic, but Islamic Moors, these are African Muslims who are darker skinned than what we think of today, actually cross the Straits of Gibraltar and invade what is modern day Spain and Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula. This happens in 711 AD. And they push almost to the Pyrenees. They push to what is today the modern Spanish-French border. Now, this invasion will actually initiate the counter-reaction that Europeans feel that they're being invaded by not just outside forces, but infidels, by non-believers. And this sense of threat is only heightened, as we will talk about, when the Byzantine Empire here actually asks for help from Rome, because they are under pressure over here from Islamic forces. So, like the United States feared monolithic communism in the 1950s, taking over the world, Western Europe fears that they are being attacked from both sides, here in the Iberian Peninsula, as well as over here against the Byzantine Empire, that Christendom is being destroyed, being squeezed by this non-Christian religion. And for a short time, in the 9th century, so in the 800s, Muslims actually conquer part of here in Sicily, which is part of modern-day Italy. So Islam is a rapidly expanding religion, but it's also a rapidly expanding political system as well, because under the traditional interpretation of Islam, politics and religion are one and the same. This is why when you hear people talking about a secular Islamic state, this is actually a relatively new thing, and something that is very unique, because the traditional view of Islam, you can't have a secular Islamic state. A state like Turkey, for example, which is a secular state, there is no separation of church and state in the traditional Muslim viewpoint. So hopefully this will help you understand not only the future lectures when we talk about the Crusades and how the Crusades are both a reaction to counter Islamic influence and the Islamic threat to Europe, but will also contribute to the hatred that Christians and Muslims have against each other that exists to this day. But not only that, hopefully this will help you understand the world around you just a little bit better, so that when you're hearing about U.S. actions against Iran, or the war in Iraq, or the possible war against Syria, or U.S. relations with Saudi Arabia, or the United Arab Emirates, which, if you guys are wondering, the Arab Emirate states of Qatar and I forget the other names of them. They are collectively known by the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. Hopefully, this will help you understand the news a little bit better. So I'm going to let you guys go, and I want you guys to think about this question, not for our discussion this coming Monday, but for the discussion on the next Monday. How was order maintained in Europe in the early medieval period? Because this idea of order that we talked about developing in the early Middle Ages, feudalism, is going to reach its zenith during the High Middle Ages, the medieval period. That's what the High Middle Ages means. It's kind of easier to say than Middle Ages. So I'm going to let you guys go, and hopefully you stay dried over this weekend. But I will see you guys on Monday. And also, if you guys get this before you get the email, look for an email from me, because I'm going to lay out some questions that I want to discuss in class. And again, I want to discuss in class. I don't want to have to needle you guys and pull these answers from you like I'm pulling teeth. I'm also going to assign another paper topic. No one turned in a paper on the first paper topic. Remember, you guys have to turn in at least 4 of these things. So I'm going to let you guys go, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. I will talk to you guys later. Thank you. Bye.